Hello everyone, my name is Fadhil Rahman Dwiputro and I will be presenting to you the comparison between the DDR3 RAM and the DDR4 RAM. The content of this presentation includes first an introduction to the DDR3 and the DDR4 RAM and also the comparison between the both type of RAM. The DDR3 has been officially released in 2007 and it is in development since 2002, while the DDR4 is officially released in 2014 and it was in development since 2005. For the specification, we're gonna go first with the DDR3 RAM. It uses an 8-bit buffer. That means it can transfer 8-bit data per process, and it also has 800 to 1866 data rate, and also last but not least, it has peak bandwidth of 64,000 all the way up to 12,800. While as the DDR4 RAM is using a banked 8-bit buffer. What does this mean? This means that it is use a group of 8-bit buffer that actually acts like a 16-bit buffer. Now, why do they use this instead of the usual 8-bit buffer? That is because if you are transferring like a 4-bit data, if you're using an 8-bit buffer, it is much slower because it needs to process longer because of it has to process less data, even though that makes like not that doesn't make sense, but it is how it is. uh, if you're using a banked 8-bit buffer, they can split between the process into two banks. That way it can go double the speed than the previous just normal 8-bit buffer. The DDR4 also has 2133 all the way up to 3200 data rate and the peak bandwidth of 17,000 all the way up to 26,600. On the next slide, we're gonna see a graph showing the difference in data rate and peak bandwidth between the DDR3 and the DDR4. As we can see, the DDR4 can go much faster and it can also store higher size data because of the bank system that we've mentioned before. Yeah, the data rate goes from here to here, and the peak bandwidth goes from below here to up there. Now, if we take a look at the market sales of the DDR3, which is shown in blue color, and the DDR4, which is shown in red color, we can see that the DDR4 performs not as well as the DDR3. Now, why is that? As we all know from previous slides, we can conclude that the DDR4 is much better in speed and in data transfer. So yeah, you might be wondering, why does the DDR3 sell better compared to the DDR4? Now, on the next slide, we're gonna see why. First and foremost, people see value. Now, the DDR3, while it's slower than the DDR4, it also has lower cost, and it is also well understood. Why? Because it has been in the RAM game, or technological game, longer than the DDR4. And the DDR3 also can improve older devices speed. Yeah. And the cons, it is incompatible with some CPUs, especially the newer CPUs, and it also needs a DDR3 pin. That means you have to upgrade your motherboard or your PC in order to put the DDR3 RAM in your computer. Now, you don't need this kind of upgrade if you have an older type of motherboard. Now, whereas the DDR4, it is the fastest RAM currently available, and it has large module size, as we've talked before. With the peak bandwidth, it can, store and send much higher size of data per process, and it also work with all motherboards, including the older one. That is why you don't need to upgrade your computer to a new, you don't need to upgrade your computer to have better pin or something like that, like the DDR3. But of course, the DDR4 will be put at the higher price than the DDR3. Also, it is estimated to be replaced by a better DDR RAM in the 2020s. That concludes my presentation of the comparison between the two types of RAM, DDR3 and the DDR4. I'm sorry if I said anything that is not to your satisfaction, and thank you for your attention.